Shroud of Turin is this amazing relic. At bottom, it's a piece of cloth. It shows a very faint sort of image of a crucified man. And the crucified man calls us to remember Jesus' death and resurrection.
Through the generations, many have tried to decode the Turin Shroud's secrets.
It was supposed to be a simple test, a tiny fragment of ancient cloth examined under ultraviolet light by 3 scientists working in total secrecy beneath the Vatican library. Decades of delay, millions of euros in specialized equipment, lead-lined walls to block any interference, no cameras, no witnesses. And yet, the moment the light hit the fabric, something impossible appeared. Sharp patterns, strange chemical signatures, an image that defied every known artistic or chemical technique in human history. The Shroud of Turin, a relic that has haunted faith and science for centuries.
This Christian holy relic is referred to as the Shroud of Turin.
Had long been dismissed by some as a medieval forgery, carbon dated in 1988 to the 13th or 14th century. But the evidence told a different story. Weaving patterns matching first-century Middle Eastern textiles, pollen from plants only found in ancient Palestine, blood showing trauma no forger could have known, and an image whose formation science cannot explain. How could a piece of cloth survive centuries while holding secrets that defy explanation? And if it wasn't created by human hands, what force could have produced it? Now, after decades of secrecy, ultraviolet spectroscopy reveals findings that challenge everything we thought we knew.
These publications include 3 papers in refereed journals and 1 conference paper on his research on the ultraviolet-induced fluorescence images of the Shroud.
The Shroud of Turin isn't just a relic. It's a puzzle that could rewrite history, faith, and science forever. The examination that took 30 years. The first formal request for ultraviolet spectroscopy analysis of the Shroud of Turin was submitted in 1994. A consortium of European universities proposed a comprehensive examination using technology that had just become sophisticated enough to analyze ancient organic materials without damaging them. The Vatican denied the request without explanation. A second proposal arrived in 1998, this time backed by the Italian government and endorsed by 3 Nobel laureates in chemistry. Denied again. Requests continued arriving every few years throughout the early 2000s, each one more detailed than the last. Each one met with polite refusal or complete silence.
It's the most studied piece of fabric in human history.
The Vatican never explained why they wouldn't allow the examination. They simply said no. In 2016, Dr. Elena Marchetti submitted what would become the decisive proposal. She was a forensic imaging specialist at the University of Padua who had spent her entire career studying the intersection of ancient artifacts and modern analytical technology. Her request was different from previous submissions. Instead of asking to examine the main shroud, she proposed analyzing a small fragment that had been removed during a 1973 conservation effort and stored separately ever since. The fragment measured just 12 centimeters by 8 centimeters, barely larger than a playing card. But it contained something invaluable. Part of the facial image, specifically the region around the left eye and cheekbone.
While people all over the world have been struck by its stunning imprint of the face of Jesus Christ,
her proposal argued that this fragment could be examined without any risk to the main relic, while still providing data that might resolve decades of scientific controversy. The Vatican's response was unexpected. Instead of immediate denial, they requested additional documentation. For the first time in over 2 decades of proposals, someone inside the church hierarchy seemed genuinely interested in allowing scientific examination. What followed was 8 years of bureaucratic negotiation that tested Dr. Marchetti's patience and professional commitment. She was required to submit detailed protocols explaining every aspect of the proposed examination. She had to identify every piece of equipment that would be used and justify why each instrument was necessary. She needed to provide credentials not just for herself, but for every scientist who might participate.
What's striking is that something very similar to this shape appeared on a test subject's facial area. What's notable is that it came about completely by coincidence.
The Vatican requested modifications to her methodology 17 separate times. Each modification required months of additional documentation. The approval process involved departments within the Vatican that rarely interact with scientific research. The Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith reviewed the theological implications of potential findings. The Vatican's secret archives assessed whether the examination might reveal information the Church preferred to keep hidden. The Pontifical Academy of Sciences evaluated the scientific merit of the proposal. Each department had veto power. Each department moved at its own pace. Dr. Marchetti later described those 8 years as the most frustrating period of her professional life. She watched colleagues publish groundbreaking research while she waited for permission to conduct a single examination. She nearly abandoned the project 3 times. Final authorization required the personal approval of Pope Francis himself. The document bearing his signature arrived at the University of Padua on February 3, 2024. Dr. Marchetti had been waiting for this moment for 17 years since her first inquiry about shroud access, but authorization was only the beginning. The Vatican imposed conditions that transformed a straightforward scientific examination into something resembling a classified military operation. The laboratory beneath the Vatican Library required nearly €2 million in modifications before a single test could be conducted. Custom ultraviolet imaging systems capable of examining wavelengths invisible to human eyes had to be installed and calibrated. Climate control systems maintaining precise temperature and humidity were constructed to protect the ancient fragment. Lead-lined walls were added to prevent any external radiation from interfering with the sensitive spectroscopy equipment. Security protocols matched those of the Vatican Secret Archives, one of the most restricted spaces on Earth. Only 3 scientists received clearance to conduct the examination. Dr. Marchetti would lead the analysis, finally getting the access she had pursued for nearly 2 decades. Professor Klaus Hoffmann, a textile analysis expert from the Max Planck Institute in Germany, brought expertise in ancient fabric composition and degradation patterns. Father Thomas Brennan, a molecular biologist from Boston College and ordained Catholic priest, served as the Vatican's official observer. His presence ensured the Church would have direct insight into every discovery as it occurred. Each scientist signed confidentiality agreements before entering the laboratory. They were forbidden from discussing the examination with anyone outside the approved team. They could not bring phones, cameras, or any recording devices. They could not take notes on personal paper. Every piece of data would remain under Vatican control. The fragment itself had been waiting in darkness for 51 years. Removed from the main shroud during a 1973 conservation effort, it had been sealed in a climate-controlled vault beneath the Cathedral of Turin. Most of the samples taken during that conservation were used for the controversial 1988 carbon dating experiments.
Well, in 1988, a carbon dating was done that basically dated the shroud to about 700 years ago.
That placed the shroud's origin in the medieval period. This particular fragment had been preserved for future analysis that kept getting delayed year after year, decade after decade. It arrived at the Vatican laboratory in a sealed titanium container transported under armed guard by Vatican security personnel. The seal bore the official mark of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Breaking this seal required final authorization, a process that took 2 additional days, even after the scientists had assembled in the laboratory. The examination began at 9:30 in the morning on October 14, 2024. Dr. Marchetti positioned the fragment under the primary UV imaging array, with hands she later admitted were trembling slightly. 17 years of waiting had led to this moment. Professor Hoffman calibrated the spectroscopy equipment to scan wavelengths from 200 to 400 nanometers, the range most useful for identifying organic compounds and artistic materials. Father Brennan monitored the data recording systems, ensuring every measurement would be captured and preserved. The laboratory lights were extinguished completely. In the darkness, the three scientists could hear only the hum of equipment and their own breathing. When Dr. Marchetti activated those ultraviolet lamps and the invisible light hit the ancient fabric, the fragment revealed details that had been hidden for centuries. None of them were prepared for what appeared on their screens. What the UV light revealed. Under normal light, the image on the shroud fragment appeared as barely visible discoloration, a faint yellowish mark that you could almost convince yourself wasn't there at all. But when those ultraviolet lamps activated at 250 nanometers, the cloth transformed into something none of the scientists expected. The facial features didn't just become visible. They acquired depth and definition that seemed physically impossible for a flat image on ancient linen.
Here we have an image of the face of the man of the shroud, as it appears on the shroud in normal light. It's what's called the positive image.
The cheekbone structure emerged with startling clarity. The eye sockets showed shadowing that suggested a three-dimensional form. This wasn't supposed to happen. The scientists expected to find evidence of artistic technique that would finally settle the forgery debate once and for all. Medieval forgers typically used tempera paint, iron oxide pigments, or blood mixed with binding agents to create fake relics. All of these materials leave distinct signatures under ultraviolet light because different substances fluoresce in characteristic colors when exposed to UV radiation. Iron oxide glows orange. Carbon-based inks appear dark purple. Lead white emits bright blue. Organic binding agents show yellowish-green fluorescence. If the image had been painted using any known technique from any period in human history, the UV analysis would identify the materials within minutes. The equipment was specifically designed to detect exactly these signatures. The scientists fully expected to document medieval pigments and close the case on the shroud's authenticity. The spectrum analysis showed none of these signatures. Professor Hoffman ran the scan 3 times because he couldn't believe the initial readings. No pigments, no dyes, no binding agents of any kind. The image areas didn't fluoresce like painted surfaces should. Instead, they absorbed the UV light, becoming darker and more defined against the naturally fluorescent linen background. This absorption pattern was completely backward from what painted or stained images should produce. Dr. Marchetti compared the UV absorption data to a comprehensive database covering 3,000 years of artistic techniques from every civilization that ever produced religious artwork: Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Byzantine, medieval European, Renaissance. No matches were found anywhere in the historical record. She expanded the search to include natural processes that might discolor fabric without human intervention: mold growth, bacterial decomposition, exposure to specific chemicals found in burial environments, heat damage from fire or intense sunlight, mineral deposits from groundwater contact. None of these natural processes produced the pattern visible on the shroud fragment. The discoloration affected only the outermost fibers of the linen threads, penetrating less than 2 microns deep. To put that in perspective, 2 micrometers is thinner than a single human cell wall. No known painting technique, ancient or modern, can achieve such impossibly superficial marking. Medieval artists worked with materials that soaked completely through fabric. Even the most delicate modern conservation techniques affect fabric at depths measured in millimeters, not fractions of microns. The coloration showed no directionality whatsoever, no brush strokes, no tool marks, no evidence of any substance being physically applied to the surface. The image appeared as if it had materialized instantaneously, created by some force that chemically altered the molecular structure of the cellulose fibers themselves without touching them. But the most disturbing discovery came when the scientists processed the UV absorption data through three-dimensional imaging software.
3D. Scientists using an image analyzer revealed decades ago that the lights and darks of the shroud image translate into dimensional shapes.
Areas showing darker discoloration corresponded precisely to surfaces that would have been closer to a human body. Lighter areas represented greater distances with mathematical accuracy. This relationship produced a topographical map containing depth information that could only be visualized with computer technology. Medieval artists didn't understand three-dimensional encoding. The concept didn't exist. They had no way to create it and no reason to try. Yet this property was embedded throughout the shroud fragment, waiting 7 centuries for technology sophisticated enough to detect it. Blood that shouldn't exist. The shroud fragment contained 3 distinct areas of darker, rust-colored discoloration. Previous visual examination had identified these marks as probable blood residue. The UV spectroscopy analysis would determine their composition and age. What the tests revealed contradicted both medieval origin theories and modern contamination explanations. The fluorescent pattern confirmed the presence of human hemoglobin. This was human blood. But the spectral analysis showed something that shouldn't be there. Elevated levels of bilirubin, a yellow pigment produced when the body experiences extreme trauma or stress. Medieval artists attempting to create fake bloodstains would have used animal blood or iron oxide mixed with binding agents. Neither substance would contain bilirubin at the levels detected on the shroud fragment. The presence of this compound suggested the blood came from someone who experienced extraordinary physical trauma before death. Professor Hoffman conducted additional chemical analysis. The blood showed signs of clotting consistent with wounds made before death, not after. Living tissue responds to injury differently than dead tissue. The blood on the shroud fragment displayed ante-mortem clotting patterns. The person who left this blood was alive when wounded. The blood also contained serum albumin, a protein that separates from red blood cells when blood clots and sits undisturbed. This separation creates a clear yellowish ring around dried blood stains. Medieval forgers would not have known about serum separation. The phenomenon wasn't documented until the 18th century. Yet the shroud fragment showed these characteristic serum rings surrounding each blood mark. The UV analysis could determine blood age through hemoglobin degradation patterns. Blood from the medieval period shows specific markers. Blood from the 1st century shows different characteristics. The shroud blood displayed degradation patterns inconsistent with 700-year-old material. The hemoglobin structure suggested much greater age. This finding directly contradicted the 1988 carbon dating results. If the cloth originated between 1260 and 1390, the blood should show corresponding age markers. Instead, the blood chemistry indicated it was significantly older. The blood distribution revealed another significant detail. The stains followed anatomically correct flow patterns for gravity-affected bleeding from facial wounds. These patterns were precisely accurate for crucifixion positioning. A person hanging vertically would bleed in exactly these patterns. The study of blood flow dynamics didn't exist as a scientific discipline until the 17th century. Yet someone or something had created blood stain patterns that matched modern forensic understanding of trauma bleeding. Every theory falls apart. The scientific community has proposed multiple explanations for the Shroud of Turin over the past century. Each theory attempts to account for the image characteristics without invoking supernatural causes. The UV spectroscopy findings forced researchers to re-examine every conventional explanation. None survive scrutiny. The medieval forgery theory has dominated skeptical analysis since the 1988 carbon dating. According to this explanation, a skilled 14th century artist created the shroud using painting techniques unknown to modern researchers. The UV examination eliminated this possibility completely. The spectroscopy scans identified no pigments, dyes, or binding agents. The image consists solely of chemically altered linen fibers. Medieval painters couldn't change cellulose molecular structure without leaving traces of the chemical agents required. The contact theory proposes that the image formed through direct contact between body and cloth. Substances on the skin transferred to the fabric and oxidized over time. This explanation accounts for the superficial nature of the discoloration, but it fails to explain the three-dimensional encoding. Contact printing produces distorted images when cloth wraps around three-dimensional surfaces. A face pressed against fabric creates wider, flattened features. The shroud image shows correct facial proportions with accurate depth information. Impossible through direct contact alone. The vapor diffusion theory suggests that chemical vapors from decomposing body tissue reacted with the linen. However, vapor diffusion produces blurred boundaries and uneven intensity. Gases spread and disperse according to air currents. The shroud image shows sharp transitions between image and non-image areas with no diffusion effects. In 1989, scientists proposed the radiation theory. A burst of electromagnetic radiation from the body created the image through a scorching effect similar to the shadows left near Hiroshima after the atomic explosion. Intense radiation can discolor organic material superficially without penetrating deeply. The theory gained attention because it potentially explained both the image formation and the three-dimensional encoding. However, controlled experiments with radiation exposure on linen produced images lacking the precise characteristics of the shroud. Radiation scorching shows directionality based on source position. The shroud image shows no radiation source directionality. More recent proposals invoke quantum mechanical processes. Unknown quantum effects during the moment of death might release energy in patterns we cannot reproduce or understand.
Now you see, current quantum mechanics, strictly speaking, is an inconsistent theory.
This theory essentially admits the mechanism remains unexplained, while hoping future physics discoveries might provide answers. The UV spectroscopy data added new constraints that any viable explanation must satisfy. The mechanism must account for superficial cellulose oxidation affecting only 2 microns depth. It must explain three-dimensional encoding without contact distortion. It must produce chemically uniform discoloration across irregular fabric surfaces. It must create anatomically accurate blood flow patterns containing trauma markers impossible for medieval forgers to know about. No known natural process or artistic technique satisfies all these requirements simultaneously. The shroud remains unexplained not because scientists refuse to investigate, but because the physical evidence contradicts every conventional mechanism proposed to account for it. Why the Vatican won't talk. The examination concluded at 4:30 in the afternoon on October 14, 2024. Dr. Marchetti, Professor Hoffman, and Father Brennan sat in silence for several minutes before anyone spoke. They had expected to find answers. Instead, they had uncovered something that raised questions none of them were prepared to address. The 3 scientists compiled their data into a preliminary report totaling 83 pages. Spectral analysis graphs showing absorption patterns that matched nothing in any database. Chemical composition breakdowns revealed blood chemistry that contradicted the carbon dating. High-resolution UV imagery displaying three-dimensional encoding that shouldn't exist on medieval fabric. Every page documented something that science could not explain. Before any of them could leave the laboratory, Vatican officials appeared with additional paperwork. The scientists were required to sign expanded confidentiality agreements far more restrictive than the initial documents. These new contracts prohibited discussion of any findings with colleagues, family members, or media representatives. They prohibited publication in academic journals without explicit Vatican approval. They prohibited even acknowledging that the examination had taken place. The report itself was immediately classified under protocols typically reserved for diplomatic communications between the Vatican and foreign governments. The 83 pages of scientific data disappeared into the same bureaucratic vault that holds centuries of church secrets. 6 weeks later, portions of the preliminary findings appeared on academic message boards and research forums across the internet. The leaked information lacked the detailed technical data, but described the key discoveries. Human blood with trauma markers that medieval forgers couldn't have known about. Three-dimensional image encoding that predated the technology needed to create it.
It's a 3D image, and a three-dimensional image because it's, again, only a nuclear image could do that.
Superficial cellulose oxidation with no pigments detected anywhere on the fragment. The leaks generated immediate controversy within the scientific community. Researchers demanded access to the full data set. Universities filed formal requests through diplomatic channels. The Vatican issued no response to any inquiry. Complete silence. In December 2024, Father Brennan gave a presentation at a molecular biology conference in Munich. He spoke about recent advances in non-destructive analysis of ancient organic materials, a topic directly related to the shroud examination. During the question period, an audience member asked directly about his participation in the Vatican research project. Father Brennan stated that he could neither confirm nor deny participation in any Vatican research initiatives. His refusal to answer was itself revealing. Scientists who conduct unremarkable research have no reason to hide their work. Only findings with significant implications require such careful avoidance. The Vatican's silence follows a historical pattern that stretches back decades. When previous shroud examinations produced controversial results, the Church consistently waited years before releasing official statements. After the 1973 conservation studies revealed unexpected characteristics, 5 years passed before the Vatican permitted publication of any findings. Following the 1988 carbon dating that supposedly proved medieval origin, 3 years elapsed before official commentary acknowledged the results. The institution carefully considers theological and political implications before acknowledging any scientific data related to this particular artifact. Some observers believe the Church has already decided to maintain permanent silence about the 2024 findings. The theological stakes explain everything about the Vatican's careful positioning. If the Church officially authenticates the shroud as genuinely 2,000 years old and definitively associated with crucifixion, it implies official confirmation of Christ's physical resurrection. The Catholic Church has always taught resurrection as doctrine. But doctrine based on faith operates very differently from doctrine supported by physical evidence that scientists can examine and verify. Authentication would fundamentally alter the relationship between religious belief and empirical proof. It would transform Christianity from a faith that asks believers to trust in the unseen into something that can point to laboratory data. Many theologians argue this transformation would actually weaken faith rather than strengthen it. The alternative creates equally difficult problems. If the Vatican declares the shroud a medieval forgery, despite evidence that contradicts that conclusion, it undermines centuries of veneration by millions of believers. Pilgrims have traveled from every corner of the world to pray before this cloth. The Church has displayed it in official ceremonies and treated it with reverence reserved for the most sacred objects. Declaring it fraudulent would embarrass the institution and potentially damage credibility on countless other matters. The safest position remains the calculated ambiguity the Vatican has maintained for 600 years. Neither confirming nor denying allows believers to believe and skeptics to doubt without forcing the Church to take an official position that could prove devastating regardless of which direction it goes. The UV spectroscopy findings make this ambiguity increasingly difficult to sustain. The evidence doesn't merely suggest the shroud might be authentic, it documents something that science cannot explain through any conventional mechanism. Silence may be the only response the Vatican can offer to a mystery it never expected to deepen. The Shroud of Turin remains in its vault, a silent witness to centuries of devotion, doubt, and unanswered questions. The ultraviolet analysis has revealed mysteries science cannot yet explain, and yet the full report is locked away, its secrets hidden from the world. What we can say for certain is that this cloth defies everything we know about art, chemistry, and human history. How was this image created? By human hands or by something beyond comprehension? Every answer seems to raise another question, and every revelation only deepens the enigma. The shroud exists in the space between faith and reason, visible yet unknowable, studied yet untouched by full understanding. And one question remains. When, if ever, will the world see what the light truly revealed, and will we be ready to confront it? The story isn't over. The shroud is still waiting, silent but far from finished.